y'all. Coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, manager at Kittelson and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking with a longtime friend of the pod and discussing city management and career transitions. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. Engaging local government leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. We're also celebrating somehow 10 years of local government stories. This interview today is part of a look back that I've been doing. But one of the ways that we're celebrating those 10 years of GovLove is by opening up the hotline for you, our dear listener. So you can call 720-282-1752 and tell us about the trends that have impacted your organizations and the local government profession over the last 10 years, as well as what you think local government might be like in another 10 years. Now, with all of that said, let me introduce today's guest. Kelly McAdoo is the city administrator for the city of Santa Barbara, California, a position she's been in since May of 2024. Previously, she served as city manager of Hayward, California for 8 years, and was also assistant city manager for the city of Hayward. She's also held roles in the cities of Palo Alto and Fremont. With that, and this is part of Kelly was on the pod back in 2017 and was one of, I didn't conduct that interview, but I edited it, and it was one of my favorite interviews from early in the run. So I wanted to welcome Kelly back to GovLove and catch up. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Great, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we start with the lightning round. It's a tradition to get to know our guests a little better, let you warm up a little bit. So my first hard hitting question for you is, what's the first album that you bought?
This question stumped me a little bit because I couldn't remember the first one I bought, but I remember the first one I received for Christmas. And it was the original Whitney Houston album in 1986. And I remember getting so mad at my parents because I was like, what is this cassette tape album? Because she looked like an opera singer because she had her hair all slicked back and this like high-throated like silk shirt, and I'm like, this looks like she's an opera singer. I had no idea. And then I was like, listen to it. Okay, you
I get it.
Parents,
Okay.
you got me.
Sometimes they know what they're doing. Yeah.
Sometimes.
That's awesome. All right. What book are you currently reading?
So a recent fiction book that I just finished in the last couple of weeks that I really loved was Horse by Geraldine Brooks. It was a really good fiction book. Followed the story of kind of historical racehorses in the South and the Smithsonian. Really, really intriguing. And then I was thinking about a nonfiction book that I've been reading. It's called Threat Multiplier by Sherry Goodman. She was the Pentagon's first chief environmental officer under Clinton, and she talks about the intersection between national security and climate change. So just interesting. Wow. We had the privilege to host her last fall in Santa Barbara, so her book is fascinating and her experiences.
Yeah,
so.
That would be fascinating. Okay, I might have to add that to my ever-growing pile of.
There are so many.
All right. What next lightning question for you? What's the last great thing, movie, TV show that you saw?
Well, I refuse to watch anything serious when I actually have time to watch TV. So my guilty pleasure has been The Buccaneers on Apple TV. So
okay. What is that? That's like a pirate show, or what is that?
No, you'd think so. It's actually a historical fiction show. It's kind of like Bridgerton, okay. A lot of like 1800s romance, but yeah. So it's about these 4 girls that move to England to try to find husbands, and it's hysterical. So
that's great, awesome. That's a great way to turn off the brain, I bet.
Yes, for sure.
All right, and then my last lightning round question for you: where do you go for inspiration?
Well, I've always been a runner, and for me, that's been what helps me sort of clear my brain. And I feel so fortunate now that I live in Santa Barbara. I get to run along the ocean most days when I do my run. And so getting to sometimes just plop on the sand and just have some quiet time has always been a place for me to go. And when I was in the Bay Area, I used to go over to San Francisco periodically and have my journal and sit on Ocean Beach in San Francisco. So a little different vibe there than the beach in Santa Barbara, but the ocean nonetheless.
Yeah, that's not a bad place for a run and a sit. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
So one thing I love to ask guests is their kind of path to this profession and to kind of the role they're in today. So I know I gave a little bit of your bio in the introduction, but what was your path to local government? How did you kind of end up in the position you're in today and in Santa Barbara?
Yeah. Well, I always joke that I went to grad school to become something I never knew existed until I went to grad school to become it. I feel like we have in the city management profession do a horrible job of like in education systems, like explaining what city managers are. People have no idea. And so when I was doing my undergrad, I did a degree in political science, economics, and international studies. And my goal was to go work in foreign service or with USAID because that I didn't want to work for the state or federal government. I thought it was too far removed from people and their daily lives. So for me, like USAID was the only thing I thought of. And then as I was getting ready to graduate, I was kind of like, do I really want to move overseas? What do I want to do? And I was at University of Kansas, and as some people know, they have a really good master's in public administration program. And so I'd had an undergrad professor in public administration. I ran into him as I was going to the office to kind of look at application materials. And we talked about like my desire to do international work. And he goes, well, you can do international work in local government. Let me tell you about it. So he was telling me about budget work he was doing with municipalities in the Ukraine, and then, explained like ICMA and the work that ICMA has done over the years with international programs. So that was how I fell into the master's program. And then I fell in love with local government. I went to KU has a great, in the first year you're on campus, all the students go to the ICMA conference. And so had an opportunity to sit down and talk with some really great city managers who were alums of Kansas. And it was just like, this is exactly what I wanted to do. It's like the day-to-day work, like hands-on, influencing people's lives, having an impact. And so for me, it was like, this is so cool. And so from like that day on, it was like, okay, I know my end goal is to be a city manager. So how do I, sort of strategize about what positions I need to take to get to that goal? And so I was like, if I don't ever make it to city manager, that's okay too. But at least I'm on a pathway where I know I'm going to be building skills that if I do make it there, that would be awesome. So I ended up in the city of Fremont right after grad school, and our great city manager then, Jan Perkins, was also a Kansas grad.
Oh, yeah.
And yes, and so so she was my first city manager after grad school.
Amazing.
And yeah, she. Talk about someone who knows how to mentor people. She's so generous with her time. Fremont is a huge organization, 1,000 employees, and she always made time, like at least once a quarter. We had coffee together when I was an intern there. And she took me to conferences, and now I do this with my interns and my staff. And she would literally just like tote me around to different receptions with her and introduce me to people. And it was like the best. It was so amazing that she invested that much time in me and my development. And so I feel really fortunate to have had that experience very early on. So I spent 7 years in Fremont, and that was really, I tried to work as an analyst in as many different departments as I could to really get the breadth of like local government experience and doing all the different things, budget, land use, HR work, just trying to get an exposure. I worked in the fire department, exposure to all the different things that go on in a city, because I felt like if I'm going to be in the city manager's office at some day, I want to be able to, when, someone comes into my office and starts talking about something, I at least know enough about the topic to ask questions and say, that doesn't
be dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that doesn't sound right to me based on what my past experience is. Could we go a little deeper there? So that was really awesome. It was just a great city to work for at the time. And then after that, had an opportunity to go to Palo Alto and was there as the assistant to the city manager, and then acting deputy city manager for a while. And then I also did a stint as the acting director of arts and sciences, which I got to oversee the children's theater, our junior museum and zoo, the arts center. So that was a whole different learning experience. And what I will say, and whenever anyone asks me for career advice, I always tell them that no one's going to look out for your career except for you. And sometimes you have to jump out of your comfort zone and ask for things that you might, you need. And so I knew that I really needed more supervisory experience. And so the division manager had retired. And so I went to my city manager at the time and said, hey, really would love the opportunity to just at least step in an acting role, do an organizational assessment for you and the department head, and give, just sort of like what's going on in the division. And they gave me a chance and let me be the acting division head for a year. And it was great because I got to supervise a division of 60 employees and just was able to get that experience. So I always tell people that you have to be looking for those opportunities, and sometimes it's really terrifying to put yourself out there, but that's yeah. And so I feel like all of those different experiences led me to and then from there went on to be the assistant city manager in Hayward. And, just really, again, always in every job I've been in, looked for like, what experience do I need to round out myself as I'm continuing to prepare to be city manager? And so I just would keep track, like, okay, my city manager at the time in Hayward, she's like, I'm going to go on vacation for 3 weeks because I really want you to have an opportunity to be acting city manager for a longer period of time. And so she literally left and disengaged. So it's been all of these things over the years where I've really thought about what experiences I needed to take the next step in my career.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, now I've got so many things I want to pick your brain about. We'll just throw away all the prep that I did. No.
Oh, that's good. We can just riff. That's fun.
Yeah. So I guess so maybe I'd be curious about different phases of your career. When you were early on and trying to get experience across different departments, was that sort of how the analyst role you were in was set up, or was that something you also kind of had to be like, cognizant of and thinking about of like, I want to see all these different departments? And
it was a little bit of both. And I started my internship and I was split between the fire department and the city manager's office. So got to do kind of both citywide projects and also fire department specific ones. So that was really cool. Most of my time I was an analyst in community development. Mm-hmm. And so, which was, our community development department was huge. So at the time, it had the redevelopment agency, environmental services, basically engineering without maintenance, building department, the permit center, planning. I feel like there's something else. Yeah. And like affordable housing. So it was like this mega department. Yeah. And so I feel like I got I was so fortunate because I got this like broad brush of all of those experiences. And, land use tends to be about 75% of, council agendas every week, or, the issues. And so really getting to deep dive into those projects. And anyone who's worked for me as a management fellow will attest that I make them go work the planning counter as part of their management fellowship.
That's got to be a great experience. Yeah, oh my gosh.
And I just am like that, you just have to know about and that hands-on, in the department doing the actual work, it's so valuable. Yeah. And so I always try to encourage people who've spent their whole career in a city manager's office, go out, do an acting assignment in a different department, get that operating department experience.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I think it's funny. I in some ways, you can go up kind of the traditional career path and, go from an analyst to assistant to, and but you don't get exposed. I think you're exactly right. You don't get exposed to some of those nitty gritty details of those departments without going out and doing it. And I felt like the example I always give is, for me, this happened with consulting. It's like I knew enough as a budget analyst to be dangerous and talk about what the water department was doing, or what the parks department was doing, or what they were up to, or what this budget request was. But now that I have to go in and actually figure out how to make those departments operate better, or what staff they actually need, you're in there, and the difference is knowing generally what the water department's asking for versus what the maintenance schedule should be is a best practice,
Exactly.
So that's really good advice. And then I'm curious, so you're right, asking for that experience, that supervisor experience that you need can be, and I have to find that, or maybe I found this I'll speak for myself. I found that as a barrier in my own career. Is how do you get that experience if you haven't had it before? So can you talk maybe more about how do you make that pitch? How do you build the kind of relationship you need to be to feel comfortable asking for that? And then what did that look like to get that first kind of big supervisory experience?
Yeah. And, I thankfully, again, when I was in Fremont, I had an opportunity. I was the sort of intern in the fire department, analyst one, and she was the business manager. And we had sort of 5 part-time administrative staff. And so she knew that I was going to need at least some level of, supervisory. So I got to supervise that team, which was, just sort of like a small group. And, just she really worked with me to help me understand, like, okay, here's best practices, like have a weekly staff meeting, figure out what they're doing. Like it was just sort of, and I knew a lot of those things were sort of intuitive to me, but it was just nice. It was like a soft place to land if I didn't do it quite right. And I knew she was there to kind of help coach me. And so while it wasn't like a group of 60 people, I at least sort of knew the basics. And so when I moved to Palo Alto, I had been there a couple of years and had built credibility in terms of my project management, my ability to work well with others. And so I think you've got to build that base of sort of trust and respect with your city manager or your supervisor. And then they were willing to let me jump in and do that. And I think it was a combination of I'd had a little bit of experience, plus I had built a good reputation, working in the city already.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like taking the leap and asking for it. I mean, the worst you can say is no. And
I think the other thing, a lot of cities now, at least, in California, I've noticed have started forming these like regional supervisory or leadership academies, and, taking advantage of those training opportunities while you're not in a supervisory role to be able to then go back to your higher ups and say, hey, look, I also did this, supervisors academy or this management academy, would love to be able to use those skills.
Yeah. Apply them. Yeah. Okay. That's really great advice. So back to my regularly scheduled programming. I appreciate the career tangent.
Yes, of course.
But so I've really enjoyed, talking with some previous guests as part of this like celebration of 10 years of GovLove. And I think one of the fun things has been kind of thinking back on the last 10 years in local government. And obviously we'll talk a lot about Santa Barbara and your current role. Before we do that, as you kind of think back on the last 10 years in local government, like what do you think some of the biggest changes are that organizations you've been in have dealt with or are continuing to deal with? What do you kind of think about as some of the big things that, have affected the profession over that time?
Yeah, I'm guessing my answers are probably not dissimilar from others, but I would say the biggest one for me is the increasing political polarization of our communities. It used to be that sort of stayed at the federal level, and it didn't really trickle down or impact local governments. And, particularly in the last, sort of 5 to 9 years, particularly, that has been, just the impacts of the federal administration on local government. And I don't think there's been a time, at least in my career so far, that has been as profound as it has been in the last 10 years. And I think the rise of local activism and, particularly when I was in the Bay Area during the murder of George Floyd and sort of the defund the police movement and protests in front of all of our house from the activists, my council members, myself, just sort of understand it. And then like, well, how do we play a role in navigating the national politics and then understanding the implications at a local level? And so I think that's just been a huge, huge shift in my career.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great example. And you're not the first, but I think that looks different in different places. And I can't imagine what it was like at that time in Hayward. But like when you think about like how you navigate that, and that because you're right, the pressure, it's hard because it's not like what traditionally cities have dealt with or what being a city manager has looked like over the last, existence of the profession. So how did you kind of navigate that? And how do you
I think it was kind of twofold. I think one was creating forums and places for community to come together. In 2016, when during the first Trump administration, we formed a community task force on diversity and inclusion. And we had the city in 1992 had actually adopted a racial equity action plan. And so we sort of with the mayor, I convened a new task force to update that 1992 plan. And so that actually was a great way to kind of bring people together for dialogue and just felt like people wanted to do something, and they felt frustrated because they didn't know what they could do.
Yeah.
And at their local, and I think that's the root of it, is like, I feel like people come to local government because it's the government that they know and they can touch and they can impact. And so how do you channel that energy in a positive and productive way to actually help the community? So that we did that, and we formed, that task force, actually formed, created a new document, and so about being an equitable and inclusive and compassionate community, and the council, adopted that. And so, that was one way. And then I think during the defund the police efforts, it was really a struggle because Hayward is, has had a lot of violent crime over the years. It's not a community that is, free of crime. And so there's this tension between, we do need police for public safety, and what does, new policing and community policing look like in this new era? And so there was a lot of demands for changes to policing. And so we did actually a statistically significant community survey to ask questions. Some of the activists had made some demands of the council in terms of what to do around policing. And so we asked the community as a whole in a survey, and it was great. We got a lot of feedback, like the community as a whole didn't want to defund the police department, but they did want a change in the way that
something
we policed.
New. Yeah,
something new. And so then we formed sort of smaller, we had about 10 small work groups that were community members, police department employees, and other city employees that worked together on a number of different issue areas and came up with a number of different pilot projects, including a co-response team with mental health and police department. So it was just a lot of really great sort of community building that happened as part of that as well.
Yeah, that's such a great example of like taking something that's like a general frustration or issue and then like turning it into like something actionable.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how much harder that would be today, like, because it feels like we're even more polarized, right? Or
yeah. Well, it's you. I think I was lucky because I had already been city manager for 4 years, so I had a lot of community credibility, and so and a lot of credibility with the council, and so that I think there have been trust built up, and I think that's where it's so important as you come in new to a city as a city administrator or city manager, and really build that working relationship, not just with the organization but the community as well, so people know you and trust you. And when you say, hey, let's do this thing together, people are like, yeah, no, she's legit, let's do this.
Yeah, that trust is key.
Yeah.
Well, it's like you're the host. That was a perfect transition to my well, I want to talk about Santa Barbara and kind of how you're building that trust and getting to know the organization. But I'm also, I think the transition of taking on a new role like this is always fascinating. But so can you maybe back up to your recruitment and like when you decided, hey, I'm ready for something new, and how you came upon Santa Barbara and how you got to know the organization through that kind of recruitment process and decided this was the next gig for you?
I will say it was a lot more exhausting than I thought it was going to be. I will be brutally honest. So it was really interesting. I'd been in Hayward a total of 14 years, 6 as assistant, 8 as city manager. And, I think there's an art to leaving. And so I think you have to be really cognizant of like your own energy, the council's energy with you, kind of where you are with things. I think there's that. And then also I knew that I wanted to work in at least one other city before I retired. I wanted to have that different experience. I wanted to be a city manager someplace else. So when my daughter graduated high school, I kind of was like, okay, now I'm sort of wide open. And I had come up with kind of a short list of cities that I thought would be really interesting to manage. Yeah. And I had a whole host, and most of them were in Southern California because I've never lived in Southern California before. So I wanted to try it out. And it just happened that Santa Barbara was on the list, and it was the first one that opened for recruitment.
Great timing.
The timing, yes. And frankly, I'm so grateful. Like, no hate on LA, but now that I live down here, I don't know that I could live in LA. It's so much traffic. Yeah, and I love, LA is great, has a lot of great things, but I'm really glad I'm in Santa Barbara. So that was kind of the decision calculus in making the change. And then, I think it was really a great change, because I think after a certain amount of time, it is nice to get new ideas
Yeah.
and to have new leadership and to have a change. And so and also kind of refreshing for me. And I had been thinking, even if I didn't get a new job in Hayward, that I would have probably gone to the council to ask for like a sabbatical of a couple months, just to kind
Oh,
of
interesting. Yeah.
just to disconnect a little bit and get, because I think after a certain period of time, you do need that kind of reset. And so I think that's just something to, we all should think about in our careers, is like, how are we giving ourselves that pause and that reset? So I think that's really important.
Oh yeah, no, that is really that's a really good, another good insight. So when you were thinking about what kind of places you wanted to, try out being a city manager in a new place, like what were the kinds of things, or maybe we could be specific about Santa Barbara. What was it about Santa Barbara that you're like, hey, this could be a fun new challenge?
Yeah, I think, for me, again, the like being in a more tourist community,
Yeah. Okay.
having the waterfront, the beach, that's super interesting. And I'm really grateful. Hayward had the main campus of Cal State East Bay, and here we have UCSB, and I love that sort of overlap between university and city, and sort of I just feel like there's nice synergy in college towns. And so that was always like, in the cities I was looking at, there were always a college, because I think that's also a fascinating challenge that comes with it. And then it's just, people don't know this about Santa Barbara, but it's way more diverse than people think. Everyone thinks it's an incredibly wealthy community, and yes, there is a lot of wealth, but there's also, you know, 60% of our housing stock, or 60% of our community, are renters.
Wow.
And so, which you wouldn't like, you think Santa Barbara, what, 60% of your community rents? And so it's just, it's an interesting, and the more I've learned about the community, the more I love it. And so I think that has been really a great mix. And I will say, as a county, Santa Barbara County is actually one of the poorest counties in California, which I think,
interesting.
People would find very fascinating. So, that's also, and it's also, the other piece was, it's the big fish in a small pond. In the Bay Area, Hayward was just one of, we were always second fiddle to San Jose, Oakland, Fremont even. And like, you just kind of were, it was sort of nice. You were in your little bubble, you kind of did your thing. Here, there is so much news media, and we get so much attention because Santa Barbara is the sort of the big city in this area. And so that's been a big adjustment as well.
Yeah, that is. Oh, yeah, I'm sure it's a huge adjustment. Well, plus I imagine being a tourist place, and and the built environment there is like so attractive that it'd be fun to just, I don't know, be a part of that.
Mm-hmm, for sure. It's been, it's interesting because it comes with its own challenges in terms of development, which I think we'll talk about a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely a beautiful community, and I think people are so passionate about keeping it beautiful. And so how do you do that in a changing demographic and social environment?
Exactly. So you mentioned kind of building trust in a new organization and getting to know a new organization. Like, how did you kind of approach that coming into Santa Barbara? Because obviously it's different than how you took on your city manager job in Hayward, where you were.
I feel, I don't know, I feel really lucky that I got to promote from within an organization for my first city manager job after having this experience here. Because when I came here, not only did I have to learn a new organization, I'd moved for the first time to a new area in 25 years. So had new doctor, new dentist, new vet, all of these things. So, I had to learn a new organization, a new community, and a new personal and social setting. But when I got here, I was like, but I know how to do the city manager job. So that was at least the thing that felt comfortable. And so I think about my friends and colleagues who have like gone from an assistant city manager and then moved and done the whole uproot thing to become city manager in a new community. Like, kudos to them, because like that, it's a big transition. And I think, it's not impossible, of course not, but it's just, I think, just giving yourself some grace as you do it when you make that transition, because it is a lot. And so I think I underestimated it. But I think the biggest thing was really, I mean, I feel like the first 6 months, I just overloaded my calendar with meet and greets, both in the organization and in the community. I can't tell you the number, like go to the chamber board, go to all the do the rounds of introducing yourself at community organizations. Obviously getting to know the department directors and, meeting with them and what are the, major projects, getting tours of all the city facilities and the major initiatives. And so, and then I think the hardest for me was like, I was so busy and focused on learning who was in the community, like trying to figure out how to meet organization members and employees.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've done, and I did it in Hayward, and it served a different purpose in Hayward, but it was actually a great unintended consequence here, was I have weekly office hours on Wednesday afternoons. And basically, I open it up to the entire organization. Anyone can schedule a 15-minute slot with me. They can use it for whatever they want, whether it's career development, complaining about something in their department, making a suggestion, like anything that they want. And I will say I have met more employees. I think I've met with over 70 employees in office hour visits in my first year on the job. And it's been just a great way to meet people in the organization. And so and then, obviously trying to get out and go to staff meetings and all of that as well.
That's I love that approach. So do you get like a good mix of folks from across the organizations at different levels in those kind of open office hours, or?
I would say it's actually. I mean, I think some of the groups are a little more hesitant, obviously, but I've had everyone from police officers to library pages to HR staff to community development staff. So it's been kind of all over the place. And I always say to people, it's fine to say you have an open door policy, but like, who's gonna have the nerve to come to the city manager's office and say, "Hi, is she available? Exactly. I'd like to meet with her." And then the likelihood of me actually being available when that person comes to my office. So I think by setting aside that time, it really. And it's great because if people don't use the office hours, I have time blocked on my calendar. So that's always nice too. So
yeah. Oh no one booked this. I guess I gotta catch up on other things.
Yeah. So it's it's just been a tool that I've used both in Hayward and here, and it's been really great.
Yeah, I love that strategy. So I know from kind of prepping for our conversation that like one of the things you walked into when you went to Santa Barbara was kind of some budget shortfalls and kind of the joys of local government budgeting. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what were some of the things you walked into, and how do you kind of help address that as like a new city administrator?
I was really fortunate when I came in because thankfully the city administrator before me and the council and our finance director had realized that, there was these challenges. And so they probably about a year before I even got here had started the community conversations around a potential sales tax measure to help fund city services. And so, I got here kind of right at the tail end of that. And as we were placing the measure on the ballot last summer, it was fantastic. And so, but my job then was to come in, and it was actually kind of nice because I was almost like an independent fact checker. So when I was making the rounds to all these community groups under the heading of meet and greet, they would ask me about the tax measure, and I'd be like, yeah, no. I've looked through the finances, and there is in fact, these structural challenges, and and it was almost like I could give some validity to what the staff had already been saying and community members. So I think that was what I saw my role was to reinforce the messaging that the staff team had already been working on with the mayor and some of the council members. And so thankfully that passed in November, which was fantastic. But I think we still have challenges, and our economy is incredibly dependent on tourism. 50% of our sales tax revenue comes from tourists. Wow. And so to me, that's very scary. And we have seen a softening of tourism, particularly foreign tourists. We get a lot of foreign visitors to Santa Barbara because of its reputation.
Yeah.
And we've really, with, kind of the visa policies and immigration discussion that's been going on, we have seen less tourists coming from overseas. And so that worries me. And as city manager, it's my job to kind of keep thinking about, okay, great, we've got this challenge. Okay, how are we going to diversify our economy? How are we bringing in different industries? What can we do, given that we don't have a lot of land?
Yeah.
We can't just put a, Costco down in the middle of Santa Barbara. But what can we do to help diversify, our economy in some strategic ways? So, we are fortunate. The city does run the Santa Barbara airport, and we have some parcels of land associated with that. So looking at like, how do we partner with the aerospace industry? We've got Vandenberg Air Force Base right up near here, some of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and a lot of aerospace industry. And so how can we leverage that land at the airport and create economic development opportunities and job creation opportunities?
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating challenge of like, hey, these big structural things are going to impact our bottom line and our budget,
Yeah.
but like, how do we kind of protect ourselves from them over the long haul? And that's something that you may not even see the results of, right? Like,
Yeah.
who knows how
I
long
may
that'll
not,
take.
yes, but it's like setting, like, we need to diversify our budget and where we get our sales tax from. How do we start laying the groundwork for that now? So
Yeah. So when you're thinking kind of big picture like that, is that like partnerships with, I mean, where do you even begin if you're like, the aerospace industry could be something like what?
well, so we do have, we do have a lot of those industries already here.
Yeah.
And so it's really starting to connect with those business leaders. We also, it's fantastic. We are lucky to have UCSB. They've had a lot of startup spinoffs that have come out of the university. And so, building the connections with the university, like how are we partnering with the university? Can we do some incubator space? The UCSB just bought a big building in downtown Santa Barbara on State Street, which is fantastic. And so partnering with them on what do we do in that building and what is that space? And so maybe some of it is incubator space, some of it is classroom space. I think there's a lot of opportunities. And so just building those opportunities, and obviously working closely with the Chamber of Commerce and thinking about what is that economic development strategy? How do we get out there and get our name out there as not just a tourist destination, but a place where you can, we call it the best place to have work-life balance. So you can have a job and then go surf at lunch and then do a bike ride after at the beach. So
I love that. Well, and that's one of the powers of having that university there, right? Like,
yes,
if you keep that talent in the community, that has all sorts of great benefits. That's
absolutely,
awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, kind of relatedly, I know lots of communities across the country are struggling with, housing affordability and homelessness, particularly on the West Coast and in California. So I'm curious, like, I know that's been a challenge in Santa Barbara, like it is everywhere in a lot of places. So how are you guys kind of thinking about those two challenges locally? I mean, I think I'll just opine for a minute, but I won't put words in your mouth. But I know I imagine one of the challenges is balancing, the built environment and the like beauty of Santa Barbara and like and some of the things that people move there for and like about it, versus like, hey, how do we keep this place affordable so some of those talented young graduates who start with startups don't like leave either. So so anyway, I'm just curious how you guys are thinking about that.
Huge issue. And, I think, unfortunately for a long period of time, this community was very anti-growth and, thought that all development was bad. Yeah. I definitely think there's been a shift in that, and people have recognized the housing crisis as their kids and grandkids can't afford to stay close to where they are. And, and really sort of, how do we create that opportunity for the next generation? It's amazing to me how many people graduate from UCSB and do everything in their power to stay here, like whether it's working 3 jobs or whatever. But I mean, it's a challenge even to get doctors to be able to afford to live in town. And so I think, one of the things, and again, I think this goes back to the changes in local government over the past 10 years, is the increasing conflict with the state of California over local control and housing policies. There has been just this slew of state legislation basically getting rid of local control over development of housing. And that's been a real conflict here. And we continue to see it because here locally, there have been a lot of restrictions put in place to preserve what Santa Barbara looks like. And so
Yeah.
in our charter, city charter, we have a 60-foot height limit. And you actually, if you're building something, you have to have one hearing at a design review board by the charter. And that's unique. I've never been in a city that's had that kind of restriction, but it's interesting because now the state density bonus law basically it supersedes our charter. And so people can, if they have a certain percentage of affordable housing units in their project, they can exceed the 60-foot height limit and we can't really do anything about it. And so that has been a real rub for the community. And so we're, trying to figure out how do we balance, as people come in. And thankfully, we are very lucky because we have a lot of architects and a lot of developers in town who are committed to keeping the environment the way it is, and the look and feel. And so we get a lot of very high quality projects that come in the door. And so we do have the opportunity, I think you can have like 5 public hearings now on a housing project. And so they do go through a little bit of design review and we are able to make some changes. I think probably not all that some of the community members would want, but that, I think what we're getting is very good quality for the most part, and it may be denser than people want, but that was kind of the whole point of these state laws was to, and then there's, some really egregious bad ones like the builder's remedy law here in California. So that one's a whole different conversation, which we could get into that. But I think one of the things I found really attractive about Santa Barbara and one of the things that why I wanted to come here was there are so many local resources. We have so much philanthropy, so many nonprofits. And I said, if a city like Santa Barbara can't come up with solutions for homelessness, the housing crisis, some of these other sort of really pressing social issues, or at least, be able to try and incubate ideas, then no city is going to be able to, because we have so many resources here and we have so many bright minds. We should be able to figure this out. And so that's what excites me, is how do we bring all these people together in conversation to try to come up with some creative solutions.
Oh yeah, no, I love. Yeah, you're right. You have a lot of resources and a lot of like talent there. Oh, which is cool. I'm curious. I do want to linger on the the state preemption a little bit there.
Yeah.
Because I think it, different than in other places where the state preemption might be like, how dare you do missing middle housing? City of whatever in I won't name the place that I used to work. But where the state's saying you can't do these things. It's actually the other way around, where California is saying, hey, as a state, like, on the abstract, we need to do more. But I realize, in a place like Santa Barbara that so values like what it looks like and feels like, that puts it in conflict in a different way than maybe even your former.
Yeah, absolutely.
Might have. So how are you kind of navigating that? Because like I can see in the abstract being like, yeah, of course we want more affordable housing. But maybe, are you sure right here in in this place? I don't know.
I mean, I think part of it is the community conversation about housing, and just thankfully a lot of people are well educated on what the state has, the new new loosening of restrictions at the state level. But the fact that we're having those conversations and communications with neighborhoods and discussions, and I think, to the extent possible, trying to work with developers that are coming in to make tweaks around the edges where we can on projects. And I think that will, but it's you can't always do all of that, and so you have to try to explain. And the thing is there's even a state law that if we deny a housing project, and it goes to court and they find that we didn't have the legitimate health and safety reasons for denying the project, we can get fined like somewhere up to $50,000 a housing unit for, and then the project gets automatically approved. And so it's this, so it's this like really just thin line that we have to walk in terms of these projects, and how do we make them meet our community values, but also build the housing that we need.
Yeah. Oh, and I imagine like it's not like Santa Barbara wasn't seeing development. It was just probably, large single family homes or like
Yeah.
I yeah. I know having worked in some places like that, it's taking an old house and making it, a new
Yeah.
house that's much bigger on the same plot of land. But
Yeah, but
yeah,
I think the great thing is it's really cool. We are seeing some redevelopment of some areas of town that are more ripe for dense housing, and so we have
yeah,
seen. I mean, it's not huge, but
yeah,
30 and 40 unit projects, and that every rental unit that gets built that way it helps, and so
yeah.
I think that has been a real benefit.
For sure, for sure. What about on the homelessness front? Because obviously
Mm,
there's development on the affordable housing, and like there's that conflict there. But also, like I imagine, I believe Santa Barbara's the county seat too. So you're
yep.
obviously also providing resources for this broader community of folks that like come in. So like how do you think about, or how's the city approaching homelessness?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, again, it's super interesting because I think, one of the things we're trying to work towards is a more unified approach amongst all the service providers and really creating collaboratives because there's so many people who want to do good, so many people, so much philanthropy, so many nonprofits that it's almost like you get overwhelmed and like there's so many people and then
Yeah,
like everyone's compete like in
how do you
competition.
navigate all
Yeah,
that?
yeah, trying to navigate like who's doing what, who does what. So trying to put some sort of structure around service provision and what like how do we coordinate service provision so it's most effective. We just opened a navigation center last year helping to hopefully navigate people into housing, so working through kind of the first year kind of operating hiccups around that, trying to figure out how do we make that model work. And then like I think the biggest what I have found both here and in Hayward, and I think most of the cities around the state, is there's a population in the middle who are not sick enough to be, to have sort of 24-hour around the clock care for either
Yeah,
addiction or mental health issues, but they're not sick enough for that, but they're not well enough to be in a
dependent.
shelter or in a sort of living facility with other people.
Hmm.
And I feel like there's it's not like the other ends are easy, or like a family,
Yeah,
like if you're a family that you fall into homelessness there, and then there's a lot of resources, and if you want to find housing, there's a lot of places where we're trying to help people. I think for me, that population that's in the middle is the tricky one, and
yeah,
they're the ones that people see on the street that are having the really behavioral mental health crises, issues that are happening on the street, and those are the ones that we're struggling to figure out how do we deal with that, and
yeah.
what do we do with those individuals, because we can't force them into situations or force them into getting help. And so that to me is the ones that are the most impactful, and we've got to figure out how to deal with that. I don't
Yeah.
have a good answer, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, it's a great point that the most visible, the folks that end up being the most visible and in most need are the ones that are falling through the cracks, right?
mhm.
There's just the resources that are available and what they need just don't quite line up, and
Yeah,
so
and I think the governor there's some recognition of that. They created this care court system where these individuals would basically be forced to go through and have sort of like court advocates and help them through a process. But that obviously it requires implementation, and state implementation of programs, new programs sometimes takes a while. So we're kind of trying to work through if we can get that going. So
yeah, very cool, very cool. So we'll stay tuned.
yes.
Well, once you solve homelessness, you can come back and tell us
Okay.
all the
Yes, and
secrets.
I'll do my next podcast on solving homelessness. That sounds
Yeah,
great.
perfect. So not to be too navel gazing on these, but on these interviews, but I'm curious just to get your perspective, think it back. But when you were on the podcast back in 2017, you talked a lot about customer empathy and disruption, and like how that could be used to improve services. And again, this is a little bit on the transition of being an internal candidate versus an external, candidate. But like, how have you kind of thought about those values and those things as you come into an organization and kind of wanting to like disperse those, but also not like, you can't necessarily bend everyone to your will in the first
Mhm.
year. So What does that kind of look like?
It's huge and still a huge part of my personal philosophy. I think one of the things is, as much as humanly possible, getting in front of employee groups and in front of employees, in front of the department heads, and talking about my values, and that, we're a customer service organization. We're here for public service. Like, how are we getting people to yes, and continuing like that conversation. Also living the values yourself. Like, if people see me like stopping to ask a customer in the hallway, hey, what do you need help with? Or like hand holding someone through a process. Like, I can't do that all the time, but like, it's important to model that behavior. And I will say, in any situation where you're coming in and you're having to do organizational change, there's a great, I went through the Harvard Kennedy School, local government, local and state government elector, the executives program a few years, a number of years ago. But there is a professor there named Marty Linsky, and he talks about organizational change. And it's he talks about push so hard that they start screaming, but not so hard they throw you out. And so I think there's a cadence to organizational change. And I think oftentimes when we come in new to an organization, we get super excited, like, I'm going to change everything. And it's like, oh, that's, you got to just really be in tune with how the organization is reacting and responding to the change as well. And so I think that's super important. I will say we are doing some of the similar training that I did in Hayward. We're bringing that here to Santa Barbara. We've been working with an organization called Pause for Change, and Heather Hiscox, who I've worked with for a number of years now in Hayward, and sort of bringing the sort of customer empathy and innovation work into local. And she really has focused on the social service sector, social impact sector. And so it's been really great to get to work with her again and to start to train employees here in that kind of empathetic problem solving. So really excited for that. And trying to, I think, as you bring those ideas into an organization, talking with people like your executive team members who've been here for a while, and say, like, okay, who of your employees are really excited about change and want to do things differently? Who are you, like, who do you have to hold back and say, whoa, yeah, calm down a little. And those are the ones we want to put in the training. And so you think about, like, who are your early adopters in the organization, and also who are people that are influential amongst their peers in the organization, and really trying to leverage those folks as change makers as you're trying to work on organizational culture.
I love that. That's a great. Well, perfect. Well, I know we're up against time here, so before we kind of totally wrap up, what's next? Is there anything you're working on that our listeners should look out for or stay tuned? Or
solving homelessness. A couple things. I'm very excited. This coming year, I will be the president of the City Managers Department for Cal Cities here in California. So that's an exciting year up ahead. So excited to serve my colleagues throughout the state on that. And then the other effort that I'm working on is a project called The Curve. And I'm not sure if you've heard about that, but it's founded by Simon Sinek and a retired police chief from Mountain View, Chris Hyung. And they basically kind of looking at changing the way that we police in our communities. And they've mostly been working directly with police chiefs, and now they're starting the conversation with city managers, and sort of how do city managers support police chiefs in making these cultural shifts and changes. And so super excited to get engaged in that conversation and work on some of those issues.
Very cool. All right. That's awesome.
Yes.
Well, so my official, always the hardest question. If you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as the exit music for this episode?
Well, I just because I went and saw him in concert recently, and his music is always like super bubbly and upbeat, and so it just makes me in a good mood. So it was "Keep Your Head Up" by Andy Grammer. I thought would be a good way to end.
Oh, perfect.
Because I feel like we need more optimism and enthusiasm and energy in local government, and just like it's tough, but we're going to get through it, and we're going to get it done because we're all awesome humans that choose local government.
Yes, agreed. Awesome. That's a great note to end on. That ends our episode today. Kelly, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me and taking the time to look back, but also talk about your current role. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders. And the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove or at our GovLove podcast page on LinkedIn. As a reminder, you can register now for ELGL's 2025 conference, which is happening October 1st through 3rd in Santa Rosa, California. And subscribe to GovLove. If you already subscribed, tell a friend, tell a colleague about us, and help us celebrate 10 years of GovLove by calling our hotline, 720-282-1752. With that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
You gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your hair down. Hey, 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 hey. I got my hands in my pockets, kicking these rocks. It's kinda hard to watch this life go by. I'm buying into skeptics, skeptics mess with the confidence in my eyes. I'm seeing all the angles, thoughts get tangled. I start to compromise my life.